When Hironobu Sakaguchi was working on the Final Fantasy series for the consoles, in the background was the first of many spin-off series in the works. The first was released in 1990, but re-released in 1998 by Sunsoft for Game Boy, known as Final Fantasy Legend. According to Wikipedia, the game was directed by Akitoshi Kawazu, and before this he worked on Final Fantasy 1 and 2. This was also his first big project that eventually led him to work on games like Legend of Mana, the romancing SaGa games, Unlimited Saga, and some of the Crystal Chronicles sequels. Another guy got this as their first big project was Takashi Tokita, who designed the sprite art and characters for Legend. He would go on to work on different assets for later games, such as the sound effects for Rad Racer 2, the lead game design for Final Fantasy 4, a producer for Musashi Samurai Legend, an event planner for Final Fantasy 7, and the list goes on and on. If the Wikipedia page is right, then he's a jack of all trades. The thing is that this game is not exactly a Final Fantasy game. It's part of another series called SaGa, and was the first game in the series that would eventually include the classic SaGa Frontier game. So this was either a game they had laying around they wanted to make money off of, or this was a true classic that they wanted to build another money-making franchise off. So enough of my babbling, let's see if this is any good. The plot of Final Fantasy Legend is pretty cliche, but for the most part, it's serviceable for the Game Boy. According to Wikipedia, Final Fantasy Legend takes place on several worlds centered around a large tower built by the creator in ancient times, also known as God in the Japanese version, to the Link world. There are 4 unique major worlds that make up different layers of the tower. The world of continent at the base, the world of ocean on the 5th floor, the world of sky on the 10th floor, and the world of ruins on the 16th floor. Time doesn't flow at a consistent pace between levels of the tower, rendering some worlds more technologically advanced than others. Various monsters come forth from the tower into each world. Many are hostile, but some of them are friendly to humans and willing to coexist. An offshoot of the human race named mutants also exist in each world. They are the magic-attuned descendants of a union between humans and the world of continent's older races. So from what I got looking up, the plot is pretty much this. You take the plot of Final Fantasy, replace the 4 crystals you need to fix with the 4 worlds you need to get rid of monsters from, and you have Final Fantasy Legend. I know it came out in 1990, but when you look back at it, you understand why the story isn't remembered as fondly as Final Fantasy on the NES. The plot of Final Fantasy Legend is pretty cliche, but for the most part, it's serviceable for the Game Boy. According to Wikipedia, Final Fantasy Legend takes place on several worlds centered around a large tower built by the creator in ancient times, also known as God in the Japanese version, to the Link worlds. There are 4 unique major worlds that make up different layers of the tower. The world of continent at the base, the world of ocean on the 5th floor, the world of sky on the 10th floor, and the world of ruins on the 16th floor. Time doesn't flow at a consistent pace between levels of the tower, rendering some worlds more technologically advanced than others. Various monsters come forth from the tower into each world. Many are hostile, but some of them are friendly to humans and willing to coexist. An offshoot of the human race named mutants also exist in each world. They are the magic-attuned descendants of a union between humans and the world of continent's older races. So from what I got looking up, the plot is pretty much this. You take the plot of Final Fantasy, replace the 4 crystals you need to fix with the 4 worlds you need to get rid of monsters from, and you have Final Fantasy Legend. I know it came out in 1990, but when you look back at it, you understand why the story isn't remembered as fondly as Final Fantasy on the NES. The graphics for a 1990 game are pretty up and down. There are parts of it I love, like the highly detailed monsters, but there are some really dated elements to this game as well. First, the monsters. Monsters for a 1990 game look pretty damn good. There's a lot of detail in them, they look menacing, and all around look like a high level of effort put into their design. Where the game starts to show its age is in the dungeons, towns, and overworld. Yes, I know it came out in 1990 on the Game Boy, but it still looks bad. Dungeons tend to look the same with nothing to help tell the difference between areas. This led to me getting lost often and a lot of confusion on where I was relatively to the dungeon. Yes, I know it's the Game Boy and it should be expected. The thing is that at the end of the day, you're going to have to draw a map or find a a bunch of maps. The audio is solid yet again. The music was composed by Nobuo Uematsu, and it's another solid outing. Some noteworthy tracks are the title screen, bell theme, and the music played in towns. While the music is still pretty good, it's not as good as other games such as Final Fantasy 4, 6, 7, or even 9. The gameplay is unique, flawed, and hasn't really aged well. I think the issue is that when you make games on the Game Boy, you can go two different paths. You can treat it as a portable NES, or you can design games that are quick fixes that are intended for short bursts. Final Fantasy Legend took path number 1. The game plays a lot like a blend of Final Fantasy 1 and 2. The game ditches the leveling up system for stat increase system that Final Fantasy 2 had. I will go more into this later. The game now features a harsher punishment for death used in later SaGa games. Each character has 3 hearts. Each time you die, you lose 1 heart, and if you lose all 3, he can't fight anymore. You need to go to a certain cleric to give them back hearts at a hefty cost. Then again, you can replace them with new characters, or you can recruit them at the cost of all their stat upgrades. The game also features a race system rather than a class. Each race can carry a certain number of items, has their own way of gaining abilities, and has their own perks and drops. The races can be broken down into basically 4 different kinds. You have human, mutant, robot, and monster, with options for male or female for humans and mutants. You can change what kind of monster you have by feeding it different food from defeated enemies, but they can't have equipment. Robots have stats increased through weapons and armor, but it comes at the cost of reducing the number of uses their weapons have. Humans can equip almost any weapon or armor and have an inventory of 8 items. Their drawback is that they need items like HP 200 or Strength plus 2 or whatever to help level up stats. Mutants can learn moves over time, but sometimes overwrite previous abilities and have an inventory of only 4. Speaking of weapons, each has a certain number of charges or times you can use them. Once those charges are gone, the weapon breaks. Same goes for items and spells. The perk with spells is that you can go to an inn and get those charges back. I have a few problems with the game that are common problems I have with a lot of 80s to 90s RPGs. The first is that the game will cut your hand off if you don't have any prior knowledge of the game or the genre. This is not a newbie-friendly game. It rewards smart players and can really punish players who aren't ready. So you can either give it time, figure out how to play it properly, or look up a lot. Take your pick. Aside from that, the game has a lot of grinding. The game will have you grind for a long time to get money to buy items so you can level up stats, get better weapons, armor, and go to better areas where you can get better monsters. I know it's a typical thing for the time, but if I want to grind for a long time for weapons, armors, items, and level ups, I'd rather go play Dragon Warrior. The way it comes off in Final Fantasy Legend is that it feels like busy work, where it feels like I'm legitimately getting stronger in Dragon Warrior. The thing is that I don't absolutely hate this game. There are some cool ideas in the game, such as selectable races and a harsher punishment for death. The problem is that at the end of the day, it needed to be polished a fair bit. It's an interesting look back at the game design that would help create classics like SaGa Frontier. My issue is that it's not the most fun RPG to play on the Game Boy. Overall, Final Fantasy Legend is a unique yet flawed experiment in game design. I think it's a cool game to look back at, and Final Fantasy fanatics should check it out. The problem is that it's a game that time destroyed. Father Time has a weird way of making games like Dragon Warrior play worse over time, yet still worth playing, and games like Sweet Home play a lot better. Then there are games like Final Fantasy 2 or the Tiger Electronic games that make you wonder why you would ever go back to something like this. It's an important game in the franchise's history, but it's not really worth going back to for any other reason than its nostalgia factor and historians like me to look back at. It's not that expensive of a game because of its reprint, but if you ask me, I'd go play SaGa Frontier to see what the engine can do at full potential and play Final Fantasy Legend more so for its history. I give it a 5.5 out of 10.